Hello everybody and welcome to yet another insight into the life of a firefighter. My name is Tamara and together with Anna-Sophie we would like to present the paper Getting Ahead of Time, Performing Temporal Boundaries to Coordinate Routines Under Temporal Uncertainty by Daniel Geiger, Anja Danner-Schröder and Waldemar Kremser, which was published in Administrative Science Quarterly. The paper deals with the analysis of how temporal coordination within and among routines can be accomplished under temporal uncertainty. But before we dive further into the content of the paper, we would like to give you a quick overview of the authors, the journal, and the style of the paper.
Thank you for the introduction, Tamara. I will now introduce our authors for today. Daniel Geiger, who will also be our guest in the upcoming session, is a professor for organizational studies at the University of Hamburg. In his research, he focuses on routine dynamics and coordinations in situations of crisis, emergencies, and in the study of innovations. Anja Danner-Schröder is the junior professor for management studies at the Technical University of Kaiserslautern. Her research focus is on organizational routines, temporality, and coordinating in highly dynamic contexts. The third author of the paper is Waldemar Kremser. He is an assistant professor of organization development and design at the Institute for Management Research at the Radboud University. His work focuses on the dynamics of interdependent routines, new forms of organizing, strategy, and innovation. As already mentioned, the paper is published in the journal Administrative Science Quartely, which specializes in theoretical and empirical papers in the field of organizational studies and is ranked with an A+ by the VHB. The regular participants of our seminar should already be familiar with this journal, since the paper Drop Your Tools, An Allegory for Organizational Studies by Carly Weik, which we discussed in a previous session, was also published in this journal. The paper we are presenting today is an ethnographic studies of firefighters in Hamburg, and therefore an empirical, qualitative paper. In case you didn't know what ethnography is, by conducting ethnographic research, the researchers completely immerse themselves in the situation they are studying. Thus, it involves a hands-on, on-the-scene learning. And this is exactly what Geiger, Schröder and Kremser did in their case study. They choose the fire brigade, as it is an organization that relies heavily on routines and temporal uncertainty plays a critical role. Furthermore, they have to respond urgently but without compromising health and safety. Regarding data collection, the researchers primarily collected data from non-participant observations of real firefighting operation executed by the Hamburg Fire Brigade. This included several 24-hour shifts, accompaniment on numerous deployments, training sessions, interviews, and overall spending almost 300 hours at the fire station.
Now that Anna-Sophie gave us a first little insight into the case study, I would like to continue with some information regarding the overall theory and previous research. Organizational coordination has been focusing on time for a very long time now. In the last 2 decades, the bridging of the concepts of clock and event time, so on the one hand, time perceived as abstract, linear, and quantitative, and on the other hand, events used as reference point, led to insights in the accomplishment of temporal coordination through a situated and incremental process of temporal structuring. With temporal coordination, the authors refer to the temporally integrated accomplishment of interdependent tasks, and temporal structuring expresses how people construct and reconstruct the temporal conditions that shape their lives. But situated and incremental forms of temporal structuring are not applicable to situations with a high level of temporal uncertainty, as you do not have a clearly recognizable Zeitgeber, which means an external pacer like reporting periods. In addition, the context is unknown and constantly changing, and misunderstandings, coordination failures, as well as time-consuming renegotiations have to be avoided at all costs. Thus, organization and management scholars need to come up with a different approach when it comes to emergency and fast response organizations like firefighters, SWAT teams, or trauma response teams. Therefore, the authors outline a routine dynamics perspective to get an understanding on how actors accomplish temporal coordination under conditions of temporal uncertainty. In order to describe the temporal pattern of a routine, pace and rhythm are two very important terms. Pace refers to the average rate of action during a complete routine performance, and rhythm describes the characteristic succession of different paces during a routine performance. With the help of so-called event clock time graphs, pace and rhythm of a routine can be described. For this kind of coordination system, we have to consider clock and event time as duality, because we need event time to describe the sequential structure of routine performances, whereas clock time is needed for determining the pace. In this case, the x-axis represents the clock time in minutes, and the y-axis represents the event time, meaning the accumulated number of action changes. Now let's switch to the main aspects and results of the case study.
The main challenge, as stated by the firefighters, is temporal autonomy, or as they like to call it, getting ahead of time. By this, they mean staying in control of the situation and remaining well prepared for possible adaptation to uncertain and changing elements. An analysis of the event clock time graphs show that idiosyncratic, meaning distinctive or individual, shapes of graph are the result of temporal autonomy of deployments. The changes at the transition points between routines indicate that there are different temporal patterning mechanisms depending on whether coordination happens within or among routines. In the case of temporal coordination within routines, the goal is to get the timing of actions right by staying in sync with actions of others and remaining focused. The temporal autonomy can be achieved by rhythmatizing routine performances, which means that routines are performed with a characteristic rhythm that is pre-established and well-trained. Additionally, an inward focus allows the firefighters to protect routine performances against surrounding distractions. As a result, the different teams are able to perform like a well-oiled machine. Still, temporal autonomy should not be confused with complete autarky. It is essential that firefighters remain adaptive if circumstances change, so they cannot detach the whole operation from the situation. Which leads us to our second temporal patterning mechanism. In order to achieve temporal coordination among routines, it is important to get the timing of outcomes right. This can be achieved by performing temporal boundaries during transition between routines. These routines are accomplished through signaling behaviors that show certain characteristics. First, they come from a designated actor, in our case, the team leader. Second, they activate pre-existing temporal expectancy frameworks. And third, they are selected based on experience-driven interpretation of environmental cues. The purposes for performing boundaries are to set the pace of the routine and to set the temporal order of routines.
By setting the pace of routine performances, performing temporal boundaries has the purpose to adjust the pace of routine performances to the current situation. In most cases, the pace of routine performances was set during boundary performances that relied on temporal cues that triggered different signaling behaviors. Such temporal cues could be the alarming signal or the alarm message. These cues then lead to the selection of pre-existing temporal expectancy frameworks. In the case of the firefighters, they state that they have some kind of checklist in mind that influences how fast they act and how much risk they take. Moreover, temporal boundaries can be performed for temporally ordering routines under temporal uncertainty. The expectations of temporal ordering of routines are related to the degree of perceived temporal uncertainty. This means that there are different patterning dynamics for different levels of perceived temporal uncertainty. First, we're going to take a look at a high level of temporal uncertainty. This would be the case for a situation where there's a high risk of an unexpected event that could affect the necessary temporal ordering of routines. Here, the authors observed that temporal boundary performances signal the expectation that routines need to be performed one after the other, which means that there is a sequential configuration of routine performances. An example for a temporal queue associated with high temporal uncertainty would be civilians in a potentially life-threatening situation, as searching and rescuing victims creates time pressure and thereby indicates the loss of control. The synchronized starting and ending of routine performances is actively enforced in training sessions, as it allows a structured approach that creates a window of opportunity for boundary performances. This window of opportunity enables the firefighters to easily switch between routines and thus creates adaptability to unexpected events. However, performing one routine after the other causes the team to not make the most efficient use of resources. For example, during the triage routine, the other firefighters simply wait for the team leader to come back and give instructions. That's why, under conditions of low or lower temporal uncertainty, performing multiple routines at the same time makes sense. By using resources more efficiently, the completion of the deployment is accelerated and everyone is kept busy. Cues that can be interpreted as signals for low level of temporal uncertainty are, for example, an isolated area of operation or the fact that no other dangers like gas are expected. Again, this kind of routine performance has its downsides, as switching routines to respond to unexpected events becomes more difficult.
Overall, we can state that according to this case study, temporal uncertainty is a critical factor in the dynamics of temporal patterning. The higher the level of uncertainty, the greater the efforts to accomplish temporal autonomy to actively protect each single routine performance from distractions. However, the operation as a whole has to remain adaptive to the unfolding situation, which can be achieved by performing temporal boundaries. The research's findings enable several conceptual and methodological contributions to research on temporal structuring, routine dynamics, and process research. But of course, we hope that this article not only contributed to these three fields of research, but especially to your understanding of crisis management and the role of routine coordination in context of temporal uncertainty. We personally definitely learned a lot and are excited for our discussion on Thursday. See you then. Bye bye.